Here are the top stories for today, November 27, 2020. Informants of corrupt public officials are set to receive their reward provided they identify themselves. Spouses of Filipino citizens and their children are now allowed to enter the country. The Philippines fared well than other countries in managing the COVID-19 pandemic. And let us take a look at the colorful Belen in Tarlac. Good day, I'm William Theo. Welcome to the PNA Newsroom. Malacanang says those who want to receive a reward for reporting about corrupt practices in the government may have to identify themselves. President Rodrigo Duterte earlier offered a reward of 50,000 or 100,000 pesos to anyone who could give him information on government officials engaged in corruption. With the new SMS platform, citizens can now simply text 8888 from both Globe and Smart and their affiliate telcos for free. While this format would allow informants to stay anonymous, presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said those who want to receive a reward would have to make themselves easy to trace.
Dahil ito po ay pinapatakbo ng Office of the President, diretso po sa Head of Office na ipo-forward ang mga sumbong na yan. At kung meron naman talagang basihan at napatunayan nga na dahil sa tip ay nakahuli tayo ng kurakot, yan po importante. No? Kinakailangan magpadala kayo ng inyong pangalan, hindi naman po i-release yan ng 8888. Just in case gusto nyong makolekta ang reward. Kung wala po kasing trace kung sino kayo, hindi nyo makukolekta yung reward.
The Philippines is doing very well in terms of controlling the spread of coronavirus disease 2019. This after a Bloomberg study showed that the Philippines ranked 46 out of 53 countries when it came to handling the COVID-19 health crisis. Bloomberg's COVID resilience ranking determines where has the virus been handled most effectively was with the least amount of disruption to business and society. As of November 23, the Philippines scored 48.9. This is higher than 7 countries such as Iran, Colombia, the Czech Republic, Belgium, Peru, Argentina, and Mexico. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said that even if the Philippines entered the list of 20 countries with the most number of COVID-19 cases, this ranking shows that we are still faring well than other countries in terms of handling the virus. He also noted that the country remains to have a low mortality rate at 1.75%. Malacanang maintains that the national government's vaccination drive against COVID-19 will not be tainted by politics. According to presidential spokesperson Harry Roque, President Rodrigo Duterte has made it clear that all priority groups would be provided with free doses of the potential vaccine, regardless of whether they are part of the opposition or critics. Vaccine czar Carlito Galvez Jr. earlier said the government began negotiations with vaccine manufacturers AstraZeneca, Sinovac, and Pfizer for the country's potential vaccine supply. Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez said the government has identified 73.2 billion pesos in funding sources to purchase potential vaccines for 60 million people in the country at approximately 1,200 pesos per person.
Paano naman magiging politika ito? Kailangan talaga natin ng bakuna, no? So wala pong politika dyan. Kung may politika po dyan, gagawin ni Presidente yung ginawa ng naunang Presidente at administrasyon ay mga kalaban hindi bibigyan. Pero marino po ang Presidente, lahat ng mga mahihirap ay magbibigyan ng prioridad, kapulisan, kasundaluhan, frontliners at mga vulnerable. Kung gagawin pong politika ito, maaalala nyo yung ginagawa ng huling administrasyon. Pero hindi po ganyan ang Presidente. Kinakailangan po ng bakuna para matapos ang pandemya at ibibigay po yan sa lahat.
The government and the private sectors are set to sign a tripartite agreement for 2 million doses of AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine. According to National Policy Against COVID-19 Chief Implementer and Vaccine Czar Carlito Galvez Jr., the deal allows the country to buy the COVID-19 vaccine developed in the United Kingdom.
Ipirma po tayo ng tripartite agreement kung saan tayo po ay makakabili ng 2 milyong doses ng bakuna mula sa AstraZeneca ng United Kingdom. Maganda po ang kanilang layunin na maging equitable ang access ng vaccine at non-profit po ang kanilang negotiation.
The government is initially targeting about 75% of the Filipino population to be vaccinated for COVID-19. Galvez said the targeted number for the vaccination program per year depends on the world market.
Marami po tayong tinatawag na challenges. One is yung supply and demand ng world market. Dahil kasi po yung mga vaccine magiging available lang po yan this coming either ang best case scenario nga po ay sa May, June, July.
Meanwhile, Galvez noted that the opening of tourism in some areas in the country did not cause any increase in COVID-19 cases. He said the spike of COVID-19 cases is mostly recorded in the Mindanao areas.
Ngayon po, nakita po natin yung mga cases lang na naging increase ay dito lang po sa ng Mindanao. I believe dito sa binuksan natin ng tourism dito sa Bohol na nagkaroon tayong tourism bubble at saka dito sa Palawan ay wala na pampura tayong nakikita na increase. I believe tingnan po namin yung report at sa amin po pagkakaalam ang medyo nag-increase na po ngayon ay itong Davao pero ngayon po na contain po natin dahil nandun po ang ating COVID team.
The Department of Foreign Affairs received a Korean government donation of COVID-19 diagnostic kits, PCR and DNA extraction equipment, and PPEs from outgoing Ambassador Han Dong-man. The donations valued at $500,000 or 24.5 million pesos consists of 17,664 COVID-19 diagnostic kits, 1 set of PCR and DNA extraction equipment, and 300 sets of personal protective equipment. The donation was in line with a $5 million or 24.5 million peso pledge of assistance by Korea to the 10 ASEAN member states funded under the ASEAN ROK Assistance Fund. Still to come, the national government assures availability of augmentation fund for typhoon-hit Quezon Province, and jeepney drivers availed of the government subsidy program. More on these when the PNA Newsroom continues.
Alamin kung paano ang tamang pagsusuot ng surgical mask. Una, hawakan ang mask sa strap at siguruhing natatakpan nito ang inyong bibig at ilong. Tandaan, ang may kulay na bahagi ng mask ang dapat nasa labas. Ito lamang ang tamang paraan ng pagsuot nito. Ihulma ang nose piece o maliit na metallic strip ayon sa hugis ng inyong ilong. Iwasan ang paghawak sa inyong ilong at bibig. Kung marumi na ang mask, hubarin ito gamit ang strap at itapon ito sa isang basurahan. Siguruhin ang maayos na paghuhugas ng kamay gamit ang sabon at tubig. Ang surgical mask ay dapat gamitin ng mga pasyenteng may sakit sa baga o mga taong mayroong ubo, sipon at lagnat, mga nag-aalaga sa mga may sakit, at mga healthcare at frontline workers. Maaari ring magsuot nito kung kayo ay pupunta sa matataong lugar. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa, kaya natin to! Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito.
You're still watching the PNA Newsroom. Presidential spokesperson Secretary Harry Roque Jr. assures immediate financial assistance to help facilitate the rehabilitation of Quezon Province. The recent typhoons reportedly left about 3 billion pesos worth of damage to agriculture and infrastructure in the province.
2 beses na po tayo nag-release ng 1.5 billion para augmentation funds na para sa mga lokal na pamahalaan na nasalanta ng sunod-sunod na bagyo. Yung pangalawang 1.5 billion napirmahan lang ng Presidente nung araw ng Lunes nung latest talk to the people ng ating Presidente. So bukod pa po dyan, nandyan na po yung mga tulong ng iba't ibang ahensya na nanggaling sa kanilang quick reaction funds at saka yung mga dahil agricultural province po ang Quezon, tatawagan din po namin over lunch si Secretary Dar kung ano pa yung mga pwede natin maasahang tulong. Pero usually po yan, binhi at saka yung outright cash doon sa mga magsasaka na nawalan po ng kanilang mga pananim.
The Philippine Crop Insurance Council will roll out its indemnity fund for about 121,000 insured farmers and fisher folk this year. The Department of Agriculture said they are those who have reported damage in their insured rice, corn, high-value crops, livestock holdings, fisheries, and other assets that were affected by the calamities. The PCIC, an attached agency of the DA, has initially released 347 million from the 1 billion peso indemnity fund to enable the affected farmers to rebuild their lives and livelihoods. The PCIC insured farmers have estimated at 1.5 billion pesos the damage to agricultural areas in 7 regions. Agriculture Secretary William Dar has ordered the PCIC to fast-track the verification process so aid could be released immediately. The PCIC covers the insurance of registered farmers and fisher folk affected by the Taal volcano eruption in January and typhoons Pepito, Quinta, Rolly, and Ulysses. The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, or NDRRMC, has approved the creation of a dam safety committee in light of the recent issues regarding water releases by dams during typhoons. The committee would act as an oversight body between Pag-asa and different agencies involved in dam operations. NDRRMC Executive Director Ricardo Halad clarified that they already have a protocol where Pag-asa makes the decision on water releases because they are the ones who forecast heavy rains. Halad said it is more ideal for the Dam Safety Committee to act as an oversight to the two organizations concerned in preparing for the approach of coming typhoons. However, the decision is still up to Pag-asa and the dam managers. Interior Secretary Eduardo Año earlier recommended that the NDRRMC be placed in control of water discharge over dams during typhoons. Over 1,500 drivers of traditional public utility jeepneys have joined the Land Transportation Franchising and Regulatory Board's service contracting program on Wednesday. The LTFRB said the program registration will provide these drivers with additional pay on top of their daily income from driving. The activity is held at the Quezon City Memorial Circle basketball-covered court from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. until November 29. Qualified drivers are given orientation on the program and assistance with registering for the program's smartphone application. Interested drivers are to fill up the program's online pre-registration form. The SCP is a program under the LTFRB and the Department of Transportation as part of the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, or Bayanihan 2. In our business news, the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines reports that the majority of intellectual property violators from January to September this year were operating online. IPOPHIL said its office received a total of 139 intellectual property infringement reports for the first 9 months of 2020. 53 were operating from Facebook, 7 from Shopee, 6 from Lazada, 3 from YouTube, and 1 each from Carousel, Instagram, and Vineyard. 7 other reported violators were caught operating in other online platforms. The IPOPHIL also reported 43 complaints about counterfeit goods and 41 reports about piracy, while 51 were other intellectual property infringement reports. As the number of complaints this year exceeded the reports for the past 5 years, IPOPHIL Director General Roel Barba said they call for new rules to expand online monitoring authority. Up next, a former student activist highlights positive activism instead of joining an armed struggle. And let us take a look at the colorful Belen in Tarlac. The PNA Newsroom returns after these reminders.
Alamin ang tamang paraan ng pag-ubo upang mapigilan ang paglaganap ng coronavirus disease 2019. Ugaliing magdala ng panyo o tissue. Kung uubo o babahing, takpan ang buong ilong at bibig gamit ang panyo o tissue. Kung walang dalang panyo o tissue, maaaring gamitin ang braso na pantakip. Kung nakararamdam na kailangan umubo o bumahing, agad na dumistansya sa mga tao sa paligid. Huwag dumura kung saan-saan, gumamit ng tissue at itapon sa basurahan. Ugaliin ang paghuhugas ng kamay at paggamit ng alcohol o hand sanitizer upang mamatay ang mikrobyo. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa, kaya natin to! Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito.
A former student activist in Cebu City has encouraged the youth to promote positive activism instead of joining an armed struggle against the government. Maria Dayan Ralion, Project Development Officer of the Metro Cebu Water District, recounted how she was recruited into the left-leaning League of Filipino Students and Students Catholic Action of the Philippines and later went to the mountains. She said communist activism that leads one to take up arms against the state would certainly not solve the menace of society, but rather add up to the burden of the authorities. Ralion said many former student leaders like her are now functional activists who could contribute ideas either in private or public employment. As she hates recruitment in schools, she urged youth NPA fighters to return to the fold of the law. The Armed Forces of the Philippines Human Rights Office has reported that 544 minors have been used and employed by communist terrorist groups in armed conflict since 2010. AFP Public Affairs Office Chief Navy Captain Jonathan Zata said the figures are expected to rise as AFP units tender reports on the activities of non-state armed groups. Zata added that the AFP-HRO submitted to the Commission on Human Rights a report citing evidence of the NPA's recruitment of children. AFP-HRO Chief Colonel Joel Alejandro Naknak said the CPPNPA NDF's manipulation of minors has shown a nationwide pattern of organized, continuing, and systematic scheme of misuse and abuse to children. At least 117 men of the Special CAFGU Active Auxiliary in Borongan City, Eastern Samar, are now ready to help secure rebel-infested upland communities. The group finished their 45-day intensive training before their dispatch to different communities in Borongan City. Mayor Jose Ivan Dayan Agda said the establishment of CAFGU in the city is essential for the attainment and maintaining the peace and development of the city. The mayor also extended the city's gratitude to the Philippine Army for ensuring the completion of the CAA-2 basic military training. For its part, the Army's 801st Infantry thanked the city government for its support to fight insurgency. Meanwhile, more residents of remote villages in the northern part of Negros Occidental have denounced the terrorist acts of the CPPNPA during a series of peace rallies and symposiums. On Wednesday, some 60 persons from 3 barangays in Calatrava joined a rally at the covered court of Barangay Minapasok. They signed the Wall of Commitment declaring the CPPNPA and its political wing, the National Democratic Front, as persona non grata. Similar activities were held by villagers and former mass supporters of the CPPNPA in Barangay Gawahon in Victoria City, Barangay Canlusong, and Barangays Tabunak and Bandila of Toboso. Lieutenant Colonel Gerard Alvaran, commanding officer of the 79th Infantry Battalion, urged the villagers to be committed and sincere in denouncing the presence of terrorist rebels. In sports, the Philippines expressed readiness to be a standby host for the Southeast Asian Games in the future. Philippine Olympic Committee President Bambol Tolentino said that he has offered the POC to take over the hosting chores if Brunei, Laos, or Indonesia begs off. Brunei is scheduled to host the 2027 edition of the SEA Games, followed by Laos in 2029 and Indonesia in 2031. President Joko Widodo announced that Indonesia would join the bidding war for the 2032 Summer Olympics hosting rights. Tolentino said Indonesia is not keen on hosting multi-sporting events in consecutive years if it gets the Olympic hosting rights. The Philippines stepped in and hosted last year's SEA Games after Brunei begged off owing to the lack of sporting facilities, accommodation, and preparation of their athletes. Tarlaqueños are taking pride of their native Belen, which had become a symbol of hope amid challenging times as they celebrated this year's Belenismos Apar. Some entries were partly inspired by the COVID-19 pandemic, with coronavirus-shaped designs and statues of frontliners made in honor of their sacrifices. The town of Moncada pushed through with their entry despite canceling all their town activities due to the pandemic, with the belief that they have to impart hope to their constituents. The Tarlac Electric Cooperative had their entry destroyed by vandals right before the judging, but they strive to put it back together. Meanwhile, the Almaville participants whose entry was damaged by the typhoons restored it with the support of the whole community. Tarlaqueños believe that despite all the challenges that came their way, Filipinos should still celebrate Christmas. Let's take another look at today's biggest stories. Informants of corrupt public officials are set to receive their reward provided they identify themselves. Spouses of Filipino citizens and their children are now allowed to enter the country. The Philippines fared well than other countries in managing the COVID-19 pandemic. And let us take a look at the colorful Belen in Tarlac. Thank you for watching another episode of the PNA Newsroom. To check more news content, check our webpage or head onto the Philippine News Agency's Facebook and Twitter accounts. For more stories about the government and how it serves Filipinos, look for these hashtags in all of our social media platforms and websites. We are shown on the pages of the PCOO and its attached agencies. Also, catch us on television on PTV4 and IBC 13. And it is 28 days more to go before Christmas. Let us stay healthy and positive even during the pandemic. And that's your daily dose of the biggest stories that you need to know from the PNA Newsroom. We tell stories that inspire change. I am William Theo. Good day and stay safe, everyone.